Hey everyone. Sound okay? Yeah, sounds like it. Clicker. Okay. Before I kind of jump into it, just want to get to know the room a little bit. Curious about who we have here. How many work in design? Hands up. Yeah, that's what I figured. Do we have folks working product management, anything like that? Yeah, well, yeah, a few. What about research? Any researchers? Yeah. Okay. Any engineers? Amazing. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today, and I think this is still a little bit of an experiment, it's a narrative that's still kind of shaping up in my head, but I've, across multiple teams now, over I think a couple of years even, we've ended up with this phrase that's like, embrace the chaos, which is something that we would kind of, when things got really hairy and spicy and it's like, it's just, okay, just embrace it, just go with it. I think intuitively, especially sort of in my earlier years in design, I had this need to like create some kind of order out of it all. There's some kind of unified model of like, this is how it's gonna go and we can create it and it's gonna work all the time. But I think over the years, I've just realized that it doesn't exist. There's just too many variables in play. There's people, there are users, there are markets, there are competitors, there's laws and regulations, et cetera. So I wanted to kind of try to make sense of that a little bit today. So I'm talking about chaos, and obviously we're at Collaborate 2023, so I'm gonna look at that from like a collaboration angle between design and these other disciplines. I'm hoping at the end of this, I'm gonna go a little bit sort of off-piste for parts of that, but that's more to kind of take you on the journey of the thought process. And then in the end, I'll kind of talk about some frameworks. I also have chaos theory on here, which I've scaled down a little bit because I didn't want this to become like a physics presentation. But I will say though, like it is used in a lot of sort of social sociology and stuff like that to deal with people as well. So it's not just a mathematical or a physics thing. But to start off, I'll talk a little bit about my background. So my name is Nis Bjorn. I'm originally from Denmark, which we have up here. I kinda, at the moment, the past 8 years I've been in London, but at the moment I don't really live anywhere permanently. So lately I have been in British Columbia, Vancouver, spent some time there, LA, I've spent some time there, Denmark and London as well, of course. I have, yeah, I guess like about 14 years I've been doing this. Obviously, you know, slightly different types of jobs in the beginning, whereas now I'm more working design leadership. So that's working with other designers and trying to help them be their best and do their best work. So I'm becoming more of an icebreaker, I think. So I've been at, I think, of the long list, I've moved around a lot of different jobs, which has really accelerated growth. I think it's something worth thinking about, agency versus in-house. I definitely think agency, you learn a lot of stuff very, very quickly, but you rarely get to sort of go really deep on this stuff, right? So often you will kind of learn all these things and then, you know, there's a new project and you actually don't get to be there when you apply all this stuff. And it was amazing, for example, to listen to Vanessa's because that's demonstrating exactly the stuff that you don't really often get to do at agencies. So MetaLab and Huge, I think, are some of the more known places I've been at. I've also been at Zone, which some of you might know, as there's an office here in Bristol. And then I've been at some in-house places, startups like Clio, for example, which is a fintech. I've worked across crypto, fintech, business, B2B, B2C is probably my comfort zone. But yeah, a little bit all over the place. And I do have an MSc in product design as well, which at the time I thought was a waste of time and I should have been working and designing instead. But I think in later years, I've really treasured that. Oh, I need to point it over here. So, I mean, I'll get it kind of out of the way first. So, how I learned to stop worrying and fell in love with the chaos. And I should caveat this a little bit. I still worry a lot. But it's about different stuff now than I used to worry about. I think when I was early in my career, I worried about what to design for people and how to make something good and how to find the right solution. I don't worry particularly much about design anymore, UX and UI and all this stuff. And I'll get to that a little bit later, why it's not because I'm amazing at it necessarily, but I think there's some process there that kind of eliminates some of the uncertainty for me. And the chaos I'm talking about is the unpredictability, the kind of the how hard it is to kind of say if something is going to work or not. I think there's still chaos that I don't particularly enjoy, which is sort of corporate chaos and political chaos and that kind of stuff. But the chaos that's surrounding design and the design process, I love that part. In another life, before getting into design, I studied astrophysics for a couple of years at university. That was because, to be honest, I didn't know that people would pay me to be a designer back then. It was a long time ago now, so it wasn't as big and as known. I thought it was either you were a programmer or something else, right? So I kind of figured out later, but I think there was this moment when I was, we were working, we were doing these calculations on gravity, like orbits of planets and stuff like that. And I kept asking the professor, what is gravity? What is it? You know, I had these calculations to do, and I was like, what is gravity? And he kept sort of, you know, throwing equations at me and constants at me, and he's like, oh, yo, no, but it's like, here's, you know, this is the gravity here. And I kept asking, and then, you know, I started diving deep into books, these thick books, and I was like, why is nobody explaining this properly? Until he kind of gave in and said, we don't know. We're trying to find out what gravity is, right? And then that for me was a bit of an eye-opener, right? Because I thought for so long that I was like, I don't get it. And we know what gravity does. The reason we can calculate it is because we can observe it. So we just have a number, and then we put the mass of the thing in, and then like, that's the gravity. But what causes that? We have no idea. And to me, that was sort of like an eye-opener, right? Like, it's okay. We don't know, and that's okay. We can go and try to find out. That got me really excited, and there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in that space. Really, it wasn't until much later that I started realizing how big of an effect that actually had on me. Working in design many years later, I think, as I was saying before, well, I was spending a lot of my energy trying to think my way to a solution. Obviously, you know, we were doing research and all this, but we still had, you know, the looming cost of engineering was always there, right? And it's like, you know, we're spending the money, and it's like, okay, it needs to be right. So I was always sort of like stuck in this, like, you know, oh, is this the right thing? And thinking about things for a really long time. And I think really maybe when it really settled in for real, I was working on a product where we had so much user data. It was a conversational interface. So we literally had, like, there was machine learning running on that. We knew what people were saying. We got personal stories out of people from that because, you know, even though they're not talking to a person, when it feels like a person, people start talking to it like a person, and they say thank you, and they say screw you, they say, you know, I have this issue and stuff like that. And it was absolutely fantastic. We had some great tools as well. To analyze what people were kind of saying about it. So we just had so much data. And I think that's when it really dawned on me. I think it had been going on for a while, but it dawned on me that I don't need to be right. I don't need to know what the solution is. Because, and this kind of changed a little bit, you know, people, I'm sure you all get this as well, right? And you were talking about before, like convincing people like it's worth doing this part. So there's this whole like, will this work? You know, Nis, you know, this thing you and the team did is gonna work or not? And I'm like, I have no idea. And then, you know, people come to you with like, oh, we need this percentage of more whatever. And it's like, that's the target. It's like, I have no idea if that's gonna happen or not. And like, if I said I think so, that wouldn't really be serious. So what I started responding with was just like, I don't know, let's find out. And that kind of became like sort of my mantra in a sense of moving more and more to thinking less and less up front and trying to get something out the door as quickly as absolutely possible, right? Even stuff that I perfectly well knew, like this is not there yet, like at all. And when I'm talking out the door, I don't just mean into research, I mean into the actual product. the thing with research as well is like it will take care of a lot of the sort of like the stuff you missed, the things that like usability things and you know, that's why you do like the 5 to 8, right? Like that's a number that has scientifically been proven to like take care of, I can't remember the percentage, but let's say 80%, you probably know that better than me. But still, I don't really consider something validated until I can see the data for it. So that was kind of the issue for me, is like, because users, there's, you know, biases that happen in there as well, and they will tell you one thing, and then when it gets out there, they do another thing. So I just wanted to get stuff out really, really quickly and then start working on it once it's there. Sorry, I keep doing this. But I think that becomes a little bit tricky because you're kind of back to, you know, the looming cost of engineering, and you're like, well, you know, are we spending the money building something and we don't know really if it's going to work yet? And that's a little bit scary in so many levels. Engineers, I think, if they're in the mindset, and I don't know how you all feel, but like, it can feel like a waste if you do something and then you have to go back and like redo it. And that's definitely, you know, one way of thinking about it. But what I started thinking about is like, if you look at the history, you know, you can go and look up what Airbnb used to look like over the past like 15, 20 years, Uber and all of these different things. Nothing has stuck around, right? It gets redone and redone and redone and redone all the time. So why not sort of embrace that approach and say, okay, we're going to put something out with the knowledge that we're going to redo it, right? And I think that was really the kind of the clicker for me, is like, you know, I was also looking back at some of my older work and realizing if I did this again today, I would do it differently, right? Things just change all the time. So I don't know how many of you are familiar. This is the sort of the lean methodology, really. It's a 3-step process. You want to try to kind of, you know, test something, put ideas out in the world, you build them, put them into the product, you measure how they do. That gives you some data, which you learn from to give you new ideas, to build stuff, etc., right? But again, the looming cost was still the issue here, even though people kind of see, you know, what this is all about. Like, what about the money we're spending on it? So that's where I kind of got to, I kind of started changing a little bit. I was, you know, I think in the earlier years, I was really sort of obsessing around like, you know, the best possible experience, right? And you were talking about like managing complexity with engineers before as well, right? And there's a lot of that, and it's still a lot of that, right? And I also don't want to send the wrong message here. I am interested in the best possible experience. But I think part of my thinking is that the best possible experience needs iteration, right? I just realized like we're not going to get it right. And that kind of pressure was also not fair, especially to folks who are sort of in their junior or mid-end that are experiencing this stuff for the first time, and putting this pressure on them that like it needs to be, you know, if our engineers are spending the time building this and it's not going to work, like that's on you. And I don't know. So I kind of started changing my priorities from building the best possible experience to building the easiest to change, not the easiest, the easier to change experience. It's still about finding a balance here. I think design has diminishing returns at some point. I have worked at some very large companies that had full-time, all year round, 10 people working on login. Like just the login form basically for like every day of the year. Engineers and designers. That makes sense if you're a massive, massive organization where 0.5% means a lot of money saved in customer support for the people that can't log in, for example. So it obviously makes sense, but it does have diminishing returns. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is like, for the first pass, what about 90% of the best experience or 80% of the best experience, but one that is very easy for us to go and iterate on afterwards? So my objectives just changed a little bit there. I'm still looking for the one at the top, but I just kind of believe that the changeability is going to get me there faster. And it takes some pressure off as well. I think that was the big thing. I think once I realized this stuff, I just completely calmed down into sort of a Zen mode, fell in love with that chaos, and I kept saying to people when they asked me, it's like, I don't know if it's going to work, but we can go and find out. Oops, that was a bit too far. So I don't know how your jobs all are. So I've been talking a little bit about chaos. I put some stuff up here. This was just a very quick like stuff that changes around us all the time that impacts products. There's laws that change. I think that's been a really big thing in fintech, for example. Platforms change if you are on any app stores. Ethics, there's a lot of change in that space at the moment, right? Technology, we have like generative AI, tools, you know, Figma, other tools like that allow us to do new things, to do more remote work, et cetera. Leaders, team changes. In this room, talking about chaos, does anybody here feel like their workplace or their design processes feel chaotic, even at times? Yeah, okay, a fair amount. It's also not always, right? And it's not like every process is super chaotic. It really depends on the type of work. From the folks who raised their hands, is one of the reasons why it maybe felt chaotic. Is that on here somewhere? Yeah, I see some nodding. Yeah. I'm sure there's many, many more things. So this was kind of one of the other reasons why I think designing for change is better than trying to aim for like the absolute optimal version first, because even if you do get it right today, in a month something else is going to change. Somebody is disrupting what you're doing. Somebody's changing regulations. You know, you're in the car industry, and all of a sudden there's some new fees or something like that you have to do. There's green initiatives, and like I think the more adaptable you are, the more ready to change, and the cheaper you can make that, the more rapidly you can respond to changing user needs and changing circumstances. So I was really convinced that change was like the thing I wanted to design for. So I'll talk a little bit about, now I've talked about sort of getting to a place where we can change things by trying to get the cost down, right? Which I'll talk a little bit more about, like some ideas for how you can do that later. But I think, how do you do this at scale though, right? Because I can kind of have that mindset and I can sort of try to do that in my work, but how do you do that on like more of a corporate level? Like as a company, how do you kind of build your stuff for change? There's so many things, and by the way, like if you're a brick and mortar type company, it's really, 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 really difficult, right? But if you are a digital company, there's still stuff there that takes a long time to change, like rebranding. Sometimes it can take ages to do that stuff and get everybody aligned. So how do you kind of speed up some of this stuff? I don't have an answer, a clear one, by the way, but I have some ideas. I think the idea about chaos, it just kept popping into my life. So I'm sure a fair few of you have seen this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think it's a movie. It's about many other things, of course, but I'm pretty convinced it is, at least in part, about chaos theory. So part of the, this like multiverse thing that happens to Evelyn as she's like making decisions is that whenever she makes a pivotal decision, another like universe springs into effect where something completely different happens. It goes off on another tangent, which is sort of the idea of chaos theory, is that very, very small changes can have dramatic effects, right? I read this interview with Daniel Kwan, who is one of the directors, one of two Daniels, who said, we could say a million things about the film, but the most simple, honest thing is it's about a mom learning to pay attention to her family in the chaos. And I think what that kind of made me think of was, I think it's about focus a little bit. I think for the majority of the movie, her focus is on everything, everywhere, all at once, right? But towards the end, I think she learns to zoom in and look at the thing that's in front of her and just kind of forget all the other stuff, find one thing that makes sense. And I think as an organization, that's something you can kind of do as well. We are in this world now where like there's massive information overload. There's way too much to care about, and we're kind of, as we're trying to care for everything, we're kind of losing touch with what's actually important and like something that can actually give meaning and something we can predict and think something smart about. So I think really in our discipline, we're also in this chaos. There's so much for us to worry about all the time. There's people, stakeholders, budgets, money, there's teams, there's leaderships, there's so many different things. So I kind of, that kind of led me to think that, what's in chaos theory that I can kind of, think about it. And this is obviously at a super abstract level, right? But like, is there something in here that I can think about in terms of making an organization or a team or a culture more adaptable to change, more change ready? And really, I think there's, and I think this kind of relates to the Evelyn story, right? So it's a concept called self-organization. It's also called spontaneous order, which basically means that that you can have a chaotic system where order exists within it. The difference is just that you can't design the whole chaotic system. I'm kind of regretting now I took out some of the physics here because I had some good illustrations of this concept. But basically, you have a lot of things like in the solar system, you have all these asteroids flying around, right? And actually it appears, because Jupiter is pulling on them, so it actually builds this like beautiful triangle with two kind of covers at the sides. And nobody can kind of design that. Nobody sat down and said, this is how they are all supposed to move. They just have one rule, which is gravity. And everything, everywhere, all at once is affecting each other with that gravity. And over time, that creates a triangle. That's not because somebody kind of designed that that's what should happen. It just naturally occurred through self-organization. There's a very simple rule in place that played out over a long period of time, and then you get a triangle and you get order, even though it's actually a totally chaotic system. So it kind of arises from the accumulation sort of over time of local interactions, meaning that these interactions are not connected, essentially, that they don't know about the existence of the other interactions. And I think for the Evelyn thing, I think part of that was she self-organized in a sense by, instead of focusing on all of the connections, she focused on the one connection, her and her daughter, I think. So there's a little bit of that in there, and kind of getting closer to thinking about how that kind of helps companies deal with chaos. I think another way that self-organization is described in chaos theory is as islands of predictability in a sea of chaotic unpredictability. So it means that locally, this can be predictable. This can be easy to understand. We know what's going to happen. If we do this thing is going to happen. We just can't say what's going to happen to everything else when we do that. And I think that starts to become interesting because now I can start to think about this as like, okay, so if we can stop thinking about like, let's set up this massive culture, here's all of the different processes, and we're all going to follow these and everything. So what about if we just kind of build up some simple languages between different disciplines? Some that are simple to follow, they have a long lifetime, they have value, they can change really easily, they can be understood easily, and they can kind of connect the disciplines. I'm speaking from the perspective of design mostly, but I would love to kind of think about filling out all the other angles as well. I think for engineering, for example, the difference that I see with engineers, both in terms of the quality of the work that they do, their motivation at the job, and how engaged they are, and how much they like what they're doing, is very much dependent, especially on this line here, from engineering to research. Engineers kind of understanding that, this thing that you were just working on, you hammered away, it was a really difficult thing, you managed to get it done, and this is the effect it has on users. It's changed their lives, right? Completely changes the kind of the mindset that you go into that with. I think obviously product engineering has a strong one. I think engineering feeling what the brand is about as well. So I'd love to kind of start thinking about the other ones eventually, but right now I'm kind of thinking about design and like how do we kind of connect that? So changing pace a little bit, I'll talk about some frameworks here that I think facilitate this self-organization. And what I mean by that is sort of, these are frameworks, there's a lot of frameworks out there, but these are frameworks that I think can help a business self-organize, help different teams self-organize. And it's another way to think about this is it's decentralization, right? So it's like this team knows how to work with this team, and this team knows how to work with this team. There's nobody on top who's like, pointing and saying you do this and you do that. It's just the teams know what's happening and where we're going and can make decisions on their own. So I'll kind of talk about those kind of four connections, starting with brand. So there were a lot of designers in here, which is good. I didn't really know how many, but I think one framework that I have found incredibly useful for this, and I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with sort of the individual items here. Vision, obviously, everybody kind of knows what that is. Values, what that is. Pillars, are people familiar with product pillars as a concept? Not seeing a ton of nods. And then principles, I'm pretty sure you all know what they are, design principles. Pillars, I'll just talk about. So the idea with product pillars is to help us make product and feature decisions. Think of it as a checklist. So we're doing a new feature now. We need to check off these 3 things. These are the 3 things that we always need to do for users. We know that through research. It's not something we went away and thought about and like, this is what we want to do for whatever reason. We've identified these 3. If we can just do these core things for users, we believe that we're going to move towards that mission. Now, the other thing this does, and I have a feeling some of you might feel this, that sometimes you have many layers of like, we have these 8 values, and we have these 11 principles, and we have these, that, and we have UI principles and UX principles, and it's all over the place. So the other idea with this is sort of to connect things so that it's a way to connect what you do on the day-to-day with the strategy that you believe in at the very top as a business, right? We believe in financial health. That means we think, in our analysis, at least that's the room in the market, this is a classic sort of gesture brand archetype. We think we need to bring good vibes. The way we're going to bring good vibes on our product is we're going to expose the truth with a joke. And what we think is going to happen, sorry, I'm kind of in the way here, if we do that well, users are going to think we're funny. They're also going to think that we're smart because we iterate with data and we empower users with tools and insights. They're also going to think that we're valuable if we offer action with direct impact and if we live our values of making a difference. So that's a good framework. It takes some work to set it up, but once it's there, it can really connect teams and help them self-organize once they understand how these things are connected. So next up, yeah, I'll skip this. Next up, product. This one is one of my favorites. So I was working at a company where we were really struggling getting teams to work together. So we had 4 product teams. They were kind of fighting a little bit, which in part was also a good thing. There was a very healthy competition there. But it also meant sometimes that when one team needed another team to do something, it would go to the bottom of the backlog because they were like, no, we're doing our stuff first. So what we were trying to think about here is like, how can we actually demonstrate to these teams that they're working on the same thing? Because apparently they didn't really know that. So we started working on this, which is sort of showing all the teams how the business model actually works, like, how are you all contributing to the bottom line? We started thinking about jobs to be done. So the colored markers here are like some of the core jobs that we had kind of identified that we were at least at the moment doing with features. We had a product called Chattermill, which is basically a fantastic analysis of user feedback that kind of consolidates everything so we could get numbers of how happy people currently were with those different features to kind of show those product teams like, the stuff you're responsible for, this is how it's doing at the moment. These are the things you're responsible for, but actually your goal is retention, and you have 2 teams working on that, right? And that kind of helped the teams kind of make way and work with each other instead of against each other. It also helped us kind of keep an eye on why do different things exist and what happens if we change one thing here. We believe it's going to improve retention because if people don't use the features that they pay for, they're likely going to eventually realize that they shouldn't be paying. And then for research, this is sort of atomic research. It's being thrown around a fair bit. To go through it like fairly quickly, the idea is to kind of better connect research and design. Research is kind of meaningless if you don't act on it with design. So how do you kind of improve that connection? And usually, when you do research, you'll often have some designs that you're not always, sometimes you do open discovery, of course, but often you're going to want to, once you think could be this direction, want to put something in front of people. And often the design team will have questions. They will have, we're unsure about these 5 things. We want to know about them. So this is a framework for designers to put in. It's like, we're worried about comprehension of this particular feature. And then researchers can be like, okay, this is something we need to observe. We can't ask them straight out the door. We have to look at what they do. Other times we need to ask questions. Other times we need them to perform tasks. And then ultimately at the end of that, you can kind of do a pass-fail. Do we think the hypothesis is true for each of the participants we did? And you can kind of accumulate that at the end and then say, okay, we have a 5 out of 8 pass. And then you can decide what to do with that. You can also store this in a database so that in the future, if you mark them with what feature they're about, you can go and search. You can find the research that you did. You can figure out like what did we try, what passed, what didn't pass. And again, to help teams self-organize with access to all this research. And then finally, with engineering, there I think the framework for self-organization is to equip engineers to make decisions and collaborate with designers, build out the same language, so that designers, engineers, if an engineer says the name of a color, the designer will say the same name of the color. And color is just one example. So design tokens is a way to kind of connect the two things, especially if you kind of connect them. There's a way to do that in Figma so that you essentially export all the colors, the font types, and all this stuff. And my favorite, you can export motion curves as well, which is the coolest thing ever because I don't know how many times I've wanted to tweak 20 more milliseconds on this one and got the engineers like, oh, you just asked me to like lower it like 5 minutes ago. So that is kind of a process here where you can have it all in Figma where designers have access. Engineers can pull it out through, you kind of use these translator tools, right, that takes this stuff which comes out of Figma. And this, I know there's a lot of gibber in here, but this is the Bezier curve right here. And the name of it is expressive, and then there's a lot of trash. And that's what we kind of clean up, in the style dictionary. The other great thing is it can go to any number of different code bases, platforms, so you can have the same token set that drives a branding website and an iOS product and an Android product and whatever else you want. And just quick example, right? Like once you get semantic with the tokens, we're talking about, this is not a red color, it's an attention color. It's red at the moment, sure, but we could change it to something else in the future if we go to Eastern markets or something like that, where red is the color of luck. And then, other stuff like radius, which is really, really painful to manage, especially once you get into chat, believe me, if you haven't already. And yeah, that's kind of it in terms of the frameworks. To kind of summarize all of this, first of all, you don't have to be right. Maybe you need some time for that to sink in, but what I can say is for me, that was a massive weight off my shoulders. Try to go to use this really early. Obviously find the right balance. Like I said, I think you might have to make it cheap to make changes before you can really go out super early. And then finally, try to help teams self-organize and figure out what their missions are. And if you work in product, try to not give too many requirements or directions. Just give them a target and give them a time frame, sort of a time box, and let them go as far as they can, and then decide if you want to spend more time. And that's it. Thank you.